I was 70 when the knock came, sharp against the wood. The kind of knock that belongs to someone who isn't asking permission to be heard but demanding it, and when I opened the door and saw her standing there, gray hair swept back, eyes still burning like they had when I first betrayed my wife all those decades ago, I felt my stomach seize as if time had folded and everything I buried under 40 years of silence had clawed its way back. Her name slipped out of my mouth before I could stop it, Maribel. And the sound of it dragged me back to 1983 when I was just 30. Working double shifts at the print shop in Albany. My marriage to Darlene hanging by a thread because the house was too small, the bills too high, and my own ego too fragile to admit I was drowning, and that's when Maribel came. A temp secretary with a quick laugh and the habit of chewing the ends of her pens until the plastic split, and I told myself it was harmless when I offered to walk her to the bus. Harmless when I lingered with her in the break room. Harmless until one rainy night when she kissed me behind the humming presses and I didn't stop her. I never stopped her, and from that moment the secret began building its own walls around me, a room I entered again and again, lying to Darlene about overtime, about union meetings, about anything that would explain the cologne that wasn't mine or the lipstick smear I once scrubbed out of a shirt collar in the gas station restroom at 2 in the morning. And for a year I lived two lives until the guilt started to rot me from inside. And Maribel wanted more, wanted me to leave Darlene. Wanted me to believe that love was worth burning my entire world, but I was a coward. I told her I couldn't, and one night I ended it badly, cruelly. Left her waiting at a diner booth with cold coffee while I never showed. And I thought that was the end, that I'd buried it under decades of silence. Rebuilt my marriage, raised children. Sat through Sunday sermons pretending my soul wasn't fractured, but now here she was. On my porch in Florida, 40 years later, her voice steady as she said, "Your grandson messaged me, he doesn't know what we were, but I do. And you will answer me now," and I felt the blood drain from my face because the secret I thought I'd take to the grave was no longer mine to control, it was alive in her eyes. In my grandson's curiosity, in the way my wife called from the kitchen, "Who's at the door?" "Harold," and in that moment I realized the affair I hid for 40 years had come back not just for me, but for everyone who had ever trusted me. And the worst part, the part that gnawed my chest raw, was that a piece of me, the younger man with shaking hands in a rain-slicked alley, still wanted her. I didn't answer Darlene right away, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Because if I said, "Nobody," she would hear the tremor. And if I said, "An old friend," she would want to come to the door, so I stepped outside instead, pulling it shut behind me, leaving Maribel and me in the sticky Florida heat where cicadas droned so loud it felt like they were warning me, and she looked me over. Her eyes not soft but not entirely hard either. More like someone inspecting a wound that never healed right, and she said, "You disappeared. Harold, you left me with nothing but whispers," and I wanted to argue. To tell her she had been the one pressing for more when I couldn't give it. But the truth hung there between us, undeniable, because I had vanished. Walked away without courage or kindness. And the shame of it pressed on my chest so heavy I thought my knees might buckle. And she pulled from her purse a folded photograph, yellowed at the edges, of a boy maybe 17, hair dark, eyes hauntingly familiar. And my throat closed when she said, "This is Gabriel, my son, our son." And the ground shifted under me. 40 years of certainty that I had gotten away with something cracking into shards at my feet. And I stammered, "That can't be," but I saw my own father's jaw in that boy's face. The same stubborn set of the brow, and I knew before she confirmed it, he grew up without you, Harold, and now he's gone, but your grandson, Daniel, he reached out to me, curious about his grandfather, and he's expecting answers you've never given. And my stomach turned so violently I had to grip the porch rail. Because this wasn't just an affair dragged into daylight, this was blood, lineage. A shadow life I never imagined touching mine again. And behind the door Darlene called once more, sharper this time, "Harold? Who is it?" And I thought of all the nights she stayed home with the kids while I claimed overtime. Of the quiet forgiveness she gave me through our roughest years without knowing what she was forgiving, and I couldn't breathe. Caught between the woman who held my past and the woman who had carried my future. And I whispered to Maribel, "Not here, please, not now." But she pressed the photograph into my palm, her hand trembling only slightly, and said, "It's too late for not now, Harold, it's 40 years too late." The photograph burned in my hand like it carried its own pulse, and I wanted to crumple it, to deny the curve of that boy's cheekbones that mirrored my own, but my fingers wouldn't obey. They only trembled, and behind me the door creaked open because Darlene had never been patient with silence, her voice carrying suspicion sharp enough to cut. "Who are you talking to?" And when her eyes fell on Maribel, recognition didn't flash, why would it? But the way she glanced between us, the distance I had placed, the tension hanging like wet laundry between neighbors who hate each other, it was enough. And she asked the question I had always feared most, "Harold, who is she?" And my mouth worked without sound, but Maribel, cruel or maybe honest in a way I had never been, said evenly, "I'm someone who knew him long ago, someone who should have meant more than a secret." And I saw Darlene's lips press into a line she usually saved for late bills or bad diagnoses. And the urge to protect her, to protect myself, to protect the image of the life we had built, collided with the truth lodged like glass in my throat, and I blurted, "Inside. Let's talk inside," but it was a mistake. Because once inside our small living room with the framed photos of grandkids lined like trophies of endurance, there was no air left to breathe. Just the weight of Maribel's presence and the photos she had forced into my hand. And Darlene sat in her recliner, crossing her arms, waiting, while Maribel stood tall as if she had rehearsed this confrontation for decades, and she said, "You should know that your husband once promised me the world, then abandoned me, and left a child behind to grow up without his father," and the room spun. The aircon humming too loud, the ceiling fan circling above as if mocking me, and I croaked, "Maribel, stop," but the words were dust, powerless, and Darlene stared at me, her voice low, steady, lethal. "A child?" And I couldn't look at her. Couldn't meet the gaze of the woman who had shared my bed for 50 years. Who had carried my children and nursed me through surgeries. Because what could I say? That I had been weak, selfish, convinced I could bury one betrayal under 4 decades of devotion? Yet here it was, clawing through the floorboards. And Darlene stood so slowly it felt like a verdict being read, and she whispered, "All these years, Harold, all these years you let me believe I knew you." And then she walked toward the hallway, the sound of her slippers dragging, leaving me with Maribel's unflinching eyes and the photograph I no longer had the strength to hold, letting it slip to the carpet where the face of the boy I'd never met stared up at me like judgment incarnate. I bent to pick up the photo, but my hand froze halfway, as if touching it again would brand me forever, and Maribel knelt first. her fingers brushing the carpet where it lay, her voice softer now. Not the blade it had been on the porch. He wanted to know you, Harold, even when he was grown. But I told him not to chase ghosts, and maybe that was cruel. But you were a wound I couldn't let reopen, and I swallowed hard. Because I could picture a boy, then a man, walking streets I'd never seen, carrying my eyes. My stubborn jaw, never knowing that the man who could have answered every question was alive. And mowing his Florida lawn, pretending he had lived an honest life. And from the hallway I heard the faint shuffle of Darlene's slippers stop. Silence heavy as a slammed door, but she hadn't closed it, she was listening. And the shame made my chest burn, and I muttered, "Why now, Maribel? Why bring this to me when it's too late to fix?" And she looked up, eyes glistening though her voice stayed steady. "Because Daniel deserves to know who his blood is, because I'm tired of carrying it alone. And because you're still alive, Harold, and lies rot more than the truth ever will." And I wanted to shout, to deny, to shove her back out the door. But my body sagged into the armchair instead, old bones heavy with the weight of decades. And I whispered, "Darlene will never forgive me," more to myself than to her. And from the hallway came a sound I'll never forget, not a sob, not words. But a sharp inhale like she had been stabbed, and then the quiet retreat of her steps. The bedroom door shutting this time, final as a gavel. And Maribel placed the photograph gently on the side table. Beside a lamp Darlene bought at a yard sale 20 years ago. The ordinary colliding with the extraordinary, and she said, "You'll have to choose. Harold, silence again, or truth, and neither will save you, but only one will save him." And her meaning was clear. Daniel, the grandson I'd never met, was already searching. Already connecting dots, and if I let this moment pass, I would die with the lie intact, but the boy would grow up with only shadows. And my whole body trembled at the choice because I had spent 40 years running from it. And suddenly I was too old to run anymore. I fumbled for my phone like it was a live coal and not a tool. Thumb trembling over numbers because the idea of speaking my name into a stranger's ear felt like handing over the one unburned scrap of paper that had kept my life standing. And Maribel watched me with that same quiet patience she'd worn when she'd waited for me in diner booths, and when the line clicked and a young voice said, "Hello?" Something in my chest dropped out, because it was neither raspy nor bitter but plain. The sound of someone not expecting miracles, only answers, and I said, too quickly, "Daniel, this is Harold." And my voice cracked, small as an animal caught in a trap. And he answered, "Grandpa," like a question shaped by hope and a map of things he didn't yet understand, and the word hit me harder than any blow, Grandpa, because I'd been calling myself husband, provider, father, but never that soft, dangerous thing. And behind me the house felt unreal, like a stage set. Darlene's framed knitting patterns on the wall. A coffee ring on the side table I'd left last night, Maribel's shoes placed neatly by the door. Proof she'd come prepared to leave, to go, to demand nothing but the truth. And I told Daniel I didn't know what to say except that I wanted to meet him, and he said, "Where? When?" As if the calendar could heal 4 decades. And I looked over at Darlene's bedroom, the door closed but not locked. And I thought of how our daughter used to fall asleep on my lap watching grainy war movies. How my son, my real son, had argued with me about college loans and then hugged me one last time before moving across the country. None of them knowing there were other names I'd said under breath. Other promises I'd made and broken. And the sound of Darlene's footsteps in the hall slowed me like an approaching storm. And when she emerged, she carried a look that could have been carved from river stone. And she didn't say his name, she said, "You called someone," as if that were accusation enough. And I wanted to tell her it was for him, for the boy we never knew. For the child who had been born into my cowardice and grown without me. But instead I felt my voice go thin and offered Daniel a coffee shop address 2 towns over. A neutral place, and he agreed, polite, distant, then hung up, leaving only the tiny ring of silence that follows endings. And Maribel reached for my hand like an emissary and squeezed as if to anchor me. And Darlene's lips pressed so tight they whispered nothing. And the house rearranged itself around the fact of my phone call. The photographs on the mantel suddenly traitors, their smiles shaded with omission. And I thought of the mornings I'd spent making pancakes. The way my grandson Matthew used to smear syrup into his hair. And how easy those domestic betrayals had felt compared to the seismic one slipping now through the floorboards toward everything I'd built. And then the first text came from my daughter. 3 words, "Are you okay?" And another from my son, "Call me." Panic flared. What would I tell them? That I had a grandson in another life? That a boy named Daniel would be sitting at a cafe next week waiting for a man who had kept him? As a rumor? I imagined the conversation with my children, imagined their faces. My daughter with her folded arms, my son with his jaw set. Imagined them reading Maribel's brow-beaten email or finding the photograph on my coffee table. And the quiet thump of old trust collapsing. And I heard my own pulse like a drum in my ears and realized the truth had the smell of metal and wet earth, because once it is up it will not be reburied. Not without bodies and noise and the new hurt of the people I loved. And Darlene said, so soft it cut deeper than any shout, "If you go alone." Meaning she would not meet him, would not be complicit in repairing the thing I had broken. And for the first time in decades I considered that leaving had consequences that ran beyond my desires, consequences that threaded through other lives, and I thought of Gabriel's absence like a wound that had been stitched poorly, leaky and raw. And asked myself what I owed that boy who had never been mine to raise. And the answer came like the rusted click of a lock opening. The only honest thing left was to meet him, to let whatever he brought, anger, questions, nothing at all, fall on me instead of the ones I'd loved all these years. But then the next knock came at the door, hesitant this time. And when I opened it 2 small faces peered up, Matthew and his little sister, with a coloring book tucked under one arm, and they said, "Grandpa, can you come to the park?" As if my world could still be the same after this. And the choice unspooled in front of me like a split road, the tidy life that demanded silence. Pancakes, Saturday soccer games, or the messy, true life that would ask for meetings at strangers' tables and explanations thin as paper. And I blinked, feeling the weight of every year like a stone settling on my chest. And I chose the one that would hurt me first. Because maybe hurting first was the only way to protect them from a later, uglier ruin. And I told Daniel, via text, "Coffee, Saturday at 10. And watched the little blue bubble of my message hover like a promise over a chasm I had dug myself.